what are the things you think are best if you can control them for your stand-up sets? Like, what do you want the room to be like?
I mean, it's very hard, and like, you want people to be a little drunk, but they can't be too drunk. I taped this. I taped something for Comedy Central, and it's free. They get people in advance. There's an open bar, and when you have an open bar, they could get too drunk, and then they get too talky. So, like, ideally, you have people a little bit tipsy. Ideally, I think a lot about is like whoever goes up in front of you. If I'm going to film something, I want someone going up in front of me who maybe does a hair of crowd work, but is getting people in the mode for setups and punchlines. And when there's setups, they listen, and when there's punchlines, they let it go. You want someone to get people in that rhythm.
Yeah.
Kind of, you got to train an audience. And I know some phenomenal hosts where, or maybe they're amazing at crowd work, but I also think like the host, the opener, whatever, needs to, aside from the crowd work and getting everyone energized, they also need to train them in what they're about to witness. Because you don't want to be, if they just do crowd work and they just talk and riff, and then you come out there and you're telling jokes, sometimes you can feel corny. If you don't set people up to like, here's what we're doing here, we're telling jokes, it can be like, oh, okay, this guy's not going to talk to us, he's just going to tell his jokes. And it's like, well, yes, that's the art. That's the
Yeah.
art form. So like, there's that element. You want people a little bit tipsy, a little bit energized, in the mood for jokes. Ideally, you have an audience that knows you and likes this art form, so they understand that already. But I do think you want a bouncer there. You want a big dude. So if someone gets a little too chatty, they can just stand a little close to them, and hopefully it stops.
Yeah.
But it's tough, man. I mean, even some of the best comedy clubs in the world, if someone is really wasted, until they cross the line of they need to be thrown out, they can just be a persistent nuisance, and it's tricky. It's
Yeah.
very tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that it's just like watching that they start out as distracting, and then it gets to a point where it's like, where can I turn on them without becoming the villain myself?
Sure, it can be very, because you're not cool. Like, part of being a stand-up comedian is you're the clown, you're jokey, you're having fun, and the moment you go like, hey, can you please not talk right now? It's really like, now you're the principal,
Yeah.
and no one wants to see the principal tell jokes.
Yeah, even having an audience member say it kind of like takes a little bit of the energy out of the room, I feel like. Like if someone else says
Yeah,
something to another table or whatever, I feel like when I'm watching stand up, if I hear someone talking, if I want to say something, even then it's like I do want to just focus on the jokes, and it's I don't know. Do you have any particular bad stories of like audience members who were particularly difficult? Maybe something you haven't, if you've already told a lot of stories, maybe something that's a little more obscure,
yeah.
but
I mean, I've had a lot of like, bachelorette parties are notoriously kind of the nightmare. I always say there's nothing scarier at a comedy show than a white woman in a plastic tiara. That is, and I recently did a casino. I forget where it was. God, in Milwaukee somewhere, and it was one of these things where like the bachelor party, I saw them entering the venue, and I was like, oh no, they were loud before they got into the casino. And they wanted me to acknowledge. One of them wrote me, the mother-in-law wrote me, say, hey, can you give us a shout out? And I was like, yeah, I could do that. But then they just kept going and going, and they kept trying to talk to me the whole show. And they're having a fun time. Everyone else is bored. And I did a thing where one of the codes for comedians to let the club know you need some help is, they could use a glass of water. And that's supposed to mean that's the way where you can stay looking cool, I guess, and the casino will take care of it. But I
yeah.
guess this casino had a different code. they had a different like code word that no one had told me about. So I just kept saying like, "Oh, they could use some more water over here for these people. Big glass of water." And I kept saying this, and nothing happened. And at the end, I went up to the bouncer, and he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry about that bachelorette party. I was going to say something, but it looked like you were handling it pretty well." And I was like, "No, that's what. What would have to happen? Would I have to start crying? Would I have to get into a ball on the stage, and you go, oh, he doesn't look like he's handling it very well at all. I better go do something."
Yeah.
That's my job, to make it look like I'm handling it well. Your job is to go, oh, I should help.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's, now I know to see what the club's code word is, because it's not always they need some water.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to like audience members who are maybe a little more innocent but still distracting, like in your special, there were definitely some nothing crazy, but like obnoxious laughers, like people where it's like, oh, this person is like one of the bigger mouths in the audience, in the local comedy scene where I go to open mics. There's one guy who's notorious for ruining people's recordings because he's laughing so loud, or he's got such a particular laugh. Do you ever like have you ever dealt with audience members who are into it, but they're so distractingly loud
Yeah,
and like
I did a winery a couple weeks ago, and there was this woman, and like sometimes a joke would really tickle her fancy, and she would laugh with everyone else, and then she'd keep laughing, and everyone would laugh at the fact that she kept laughing. It was a funny moment, and then she kept laughing after that, and it was like, oh no. And then she left the room, and it's like, okay, again, everyone laughs. Oh, this is funny. And then she came back, and she did that about 5 more times throughout the night. And it's one of those things where like she's having fun, but I can see from my vantage point, the rest of the audience is like, okay, enough. But I can't. What am I going to do? I can't just move on because her laugh is so loud, and it's awkward to be like, can you stop laughing?
Yeah, it's even worse than the principal thing. It's like then you're like the joke police. I mean, for
Yeah,
like
yeah.
enjoying it. Um,
And that can be really tough. I think like a mean heckler, you can shut them down, but sometimes people just talk, and they're not being mean, but they're being distracting. And if they're in the front row, especially, I can hear them, but everyone behind them cannot. And so, like, I can, again, it's from my vantage point, I can see that they're ruining the show for other people, but I don't know what to do
yeah,
because they keep talking. And sometimes with hecklers, it can be very tough. You just got to ignore and keep going forward, and you just hope they take the hint.